All right, Brobs, we're going to do a lot. The sorrow of Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. This is a longer one. It's August 12th, obviously, since that's the day we're on. August 12th, 1771. Certainly, Albert is the best fellow in the world. I had a strange scene with him yesterday. I went to take leave of him, for I had taken it into my head to spend a few days in these hills from where I now write to you. As I was walking up and down his room, my eye fell upon his pistols. Lend me those pistols, said I, for my journey. By all means, he replied, if you will take the trouble to load them. They only hang there pro forma. I took down one of them, and he continued, ever since I nearly paid for my extreme caution, I will have nothing to do with these things. I was curious to hear the story. I was staying, said he, some 3 months ago at a friend's house in the country. I had a brace of pistols with me, unloaded, and I slept without anxiety. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting by myself, doing nothing, when it occurred to me, I do not know how, that the house might be attacked, that we might require the pistols, that we might, in short, you know how we sometimes imagine things when we have nothing better to do. I gave the pistols to the servant to clean and load. He was dallying with the maids and trying to frighten them when the pistol went off. God knows how. The ramrod was still in the barrel, and it went straight through the ball of the right thumb of one of the girls and shattered it. I had to endure her lamentations and pay the surgeon's bill. So since that time I have kept my weapons unloaded. My dear fellow, what is the use of prudence? We can never guard against all possible dangers. However, now you must know I am very fond of him until he says, however, is it not self evident that every universal rule must have its exception? But he is so exceedingly anxious to justify himself that if he thinks he has said anything too precipitate, or too general, or only half true, he never stops qualifying, modifying, or extenuating, till at last he appears to have said nothing at all. On this occasion, Albert was deeply immersed in his subject. What's up, bruv? I finally ceased to listen to him and became lost in reverie. With a sudden motion, I pointed the mouth of the pistol to my forehead, over the right eye. What are you doing? Cried Albert, turning the pistol away. It is not loaded, said I. Even so, he asked, with impatience, what is the meaning of this? I cannot imagine how a man can be so mad as to shoot himself. The very idea of it shocks me. Oh, you people, I said, why should you always have to label an action and call it mad or wise, good or bad? What does it all mean? Have you fathomed the motives of our actions? Can you explain the causes and make them inevitable? If you could, you would be less hasty with your labels. The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. But you will admit, said Albert, that some actions are vicious. Let them spring from whatever motives they may. I granted it and shrugged my shoulders. Still, I continued, there are some exceptions here too. Theft is a crime, but the man who commits it from extreme poverty to save his family from starvation, does he deserve pity or punishment? Who shall throw the first stone at a husband who, in just resentment, sacrifices his faithless wife and her perfidious seducer? Or at the young girl who, in an hour of rapture, forgets herself in the overwhelming joys of love? Even our laws, cold and pedantic as they are, relent in such cases and withhold their punishments or their punishment. This is quite another thing, said Albert, because a man under the influence of violent passion loses all reasoning power and is regarded as drunk or insane. Oh, you rationalist, I replied, smiling. Passion, drunkenness, madness, you moral creature, so calm and so righteous. You abhor the drunken man and detest the eccentric. You pass by like the Levite, and thank God, like the Pharisee, that you are not like one of them. I have been drunk more than once. My passions have always bordered on madness. I am not ashamed to confess it. I have learned in my own way that all extraordinary men who have done great and improbable things have ever been decried by the world as drunk or insane. And in ordinary life, too, it is not intolerable that no one can undertake anything noble or generous without having everybody shout, "That fellow is drunk, he is mad." Shame on you, ye sages. Here you go again, said Albert. You always exaggerate. And in this matter you are undoubtedly wrong. We were speaking of suicide, which you compare with great actions, when actually it is impossible to regard it as anything but weakness. It is much easier to die than to bear a life of misery with fortitude. What's up, bruv? I was on the point of breaking off the conversation, for nothing puts me off so completely as when someone utters a wretched commonplace when I am talking from the depths of my heart. However, I controlled myself, for I had often heard the same observation with sufficient vexation. I answered him, therefore, with some heat. You call this a weakness? Don't be led astray by appearances. When a nation which has long groaned under the intolerable yoke of a tyrant rises at last and throws off its chains, do you call that weakness? The man who, to save his house from the flames, finds his physical strength redoubled so that he can lift burdens with ease which normally he could scarcely move. He who, under the rage of an insult, attacks and overwhelms half a dozen of his enemies, are these to be called weak? My friend, if a display of energy be strength, how can the highest exertion of it be a weakness? Albert looked at me and said, Do forgive me, but I do not see that the examples you have produced bear any relation to the question. That may be, I answered. I have often been told that my method of argument borders a little on the absurd, but let us see if we cannot place the matter in another light by inquiring what may be a man's state of mind who resolves to free himself from the burden of life, a burden which often seems so pleasant to bear. Surely we are justified in discussing a subject such as this only in so far as we can put ourselves in another man's situation. Human nature, I continued, has its limits. It can endure a certain degree of joy, sorrow, and pain, but collapses as soon as this is exceeded. The question, therefore, is not whether a man is strong or weak, but whether he is able to endure the measure of his suffering, moral or physical, and in my opinion, it is just as absurd to call a man a coward who kills himself as to call a man a coward who dies of a malignant fever. Paradox, all paradox, cried Albert. Not so paradoxical as you imagine, I replied. You admit that we call a disease mortal when nature is so severely attacked, and her strength so far exhausted that she cannot possibly recover, no matter what the change that may take place. Now, my friend, apply this to the mind. Observe a man in his natural, confined condition. Consider how ideas work upon him and how impressions affect him, till at length a violent passion seizes him, destroys all his powers of calm reflection, and utterly ruins him. It is in vain that a man of sound mind and cool temper recognizes the condition of such a wretched being. In vain that he counsels him, just as a healthy man cannot impart his strength to an invalid. Albert thought this too general. I reminded him about a girl who had drowned herself a short time previously, and I related her story. She was a good creature who had grown up in the narrow sphere of her domestic chores and weekly appointed labor, one who knew no pleasure beyond a walk in the company of her friends on Sundays, dressed in her best clothes, which she had got together gradually, or perhaps going to a dance now and then during the holidays, and chatting away her spare hours with a neighbor, discussing the scandals or the quarrels of the village, trifles sufficient to occupy her heart. At length, the warmth of her nature is aroused by unfamiliar desires. She is flattered by the attention of men. Her former pleasures seem to her more and more insipid, till eventually she meets a young man to whom she is attracted by a strange new feeling. Upon him she now rests all her hopes. She forgets the world around her. She sees, hears, and him only. He alone occupies all her thoughts. Unspoiled by the empty indulgence of enervating vanity, her affection moving steadily towards its object, she hopes to be his, and to realize, in an everlasting union with him, all that happiness which she sought, all that bliss for which she longed. His repeated promises confirm her hopes, embraces, and endearments, which increase the ardor of her desires, overpower her soul. She floats in a dim, delusive anticipation of her happiness, and her feelings become excited to their utmost tension. She stretches out her arms finally to embrace the object of all her wishes, and her lover abandons her, stunned and bewildered. She stands upon a precipice. All is darkness around her, no prospect, no hope, no consolation, forsaken by him in whom her existence was centered. She sees nothing of the world before her, thinks nothing of the many others who might fill the void in her heart. She feels herself deserted, forsaken by all the world, and unseen and impelled by the agony in her soul, she plunges into the deep to end her sufferings in the broad embrace of death. You see, Albert, this is the story of thousands. And now tell me, is this not a case of physical infirmity? Nature can find no way out of the labyrinth of confusion and contradiction, and the poor creature must die. Shame on him who can look on calmly and say, "Foolish girl." She should have waited. She should have let time wear off the impression. Her despair would have been eased, and she would have found another lover to comfort her. One might as well say, the fool to die of a fever. Why did he not wait till his strength was restored, till his blood became calm? All would have gone well, and he would have been alive now. Albert, who could not even now see the justice of the comparison, offered some further objections, amongst others, that I had taken the case of a mere ignorant girl, but how a rational being of sense, of more understanding and experience, could be excused, he was unable to comprehend. My friend, I exclaimed, a man is a man, and whatever be the extent of his reasoning powers, they are of little avail when passion rages within, and he feels himself confined by the narrow limits of human nature. Rather, let us talk of this some other time, I said, and took my hat. My heart was overfull, and we parted without having understood each other. How rare in this world is understanding. And that ends that entry. And the sorrows of young. All right, bye, bros. Until I get ready to read this book a little bit later. Just catching up. Goodbye, bros. Goodbye, bye.